This next video is going to be on checking a ignition module to make sure the ignition module is good. Basically with an ignition module you're just going to check inputs and outputs. So if you've got the correct inputs coming in, you should have the correct outputs coming out. That should be enough to check to see whether or not your ignition module is working. So again, we're going to use the oscilloscope on this one, and the first thing we need to do is check for service information to find out which wires we need to probe. Okay, I've looked up the service information on ProDemand, and here's our ignition module right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for reference high and reference low. And I believe the reference high is the one we're going to be looking at, but you can probe either one of those two wires, and whichever one gives you a good signal, that would be fine. You also have reference high and reference low. This is from the crankshaft sensor, and this is from the camshaft sensor. So you basically want to look at and make sure that you have a crankshaft signal and a camshaft signal, and then we're going to look for spark output. So that's what we're going to do. So what I've done is I've looked up the service information, and on this pin right here that I've got back probed into this connector, it's into the purple wire, and that is going to be your cam signal, and that's going to be on channel A. This is the red wire here. It's going to go into the yellow wire, which is your crank signal, which is going to be on channel B of the oscilloscope. So that's how I've got it hooked up. Now I'm going to put you on the computer so you can see what it looks like when we start the engine. Remember, the crankshaft sensor is the blue wire, or the blue signal, which is on top. Or sorry, that's the cam sensor. The crank sensor is the red wire, or the red trace on the bottom. So we're going to key on, start the engine. So we've got really good signals on both the crank and the camshaft. So this would be the camshaft signal coming into the ignition module. This is the camshaft sensor up here, the crankshaft right here. And so that's what we're looking at for crank and cam. I've got a spark tester hooked up so that we can check the output of the ignition module. So basically the output of the ignition module is going to be just that. We're going to have spark coming out. So I'm going to start the engine up, and you'll be able to see the spark jumping the gap right here. And this is one of the spark testers that I was telling you about in the chapter lecture assignment. And so I'll show you the spark tester after we demonstrate the spark jumping. So we'll go ahead and start the engine now. So you can see the spark jumping. And so that tells me that there's ignition output. Okay, this is a couple of different methods for checking for spark. This is the ST125 that I mentioned in the chapter lecture. Looks like just a spark plug that is soldered to a connector. This one here I actually did solder it because it broke off. But it's different than a spark plug. If you look at the inside here, the center electrode is way down inside the center, or the ceramic insulator. And so when this thing sparks, it simulates a loaded engine or a compressed engine. And the spark will jump up out and zap across here. So you're looking for a nice clean blue spark. And that's that one. These are kind of expensive. They'll run somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70 bucks to get one of those. This one here is probably my favorite. This one's made by Thexton, and you can buy them at any of the auto parts stores. Also, you can buy them at Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight, they sell exactly the same thing, but it's much cheaper. Basically, all you're doing is you're putting the spark plug wire on this end, you're clipping this end to ground, and you can adjust how much of a gap you want to check, so whether or not you're dealing with high output ignition systems or standard ignition systems, stuff like that. So that's a good one. This one is easy to come by, but it's my least favorite method. And this has a little light that strobes every time the coil fires. So you hook your coil wire up here, and on this end you hook that up to a spark plug, and then the light fires when the coil fires. This one here, had the worst luck as far as getting accurate readings out of it, because it just flashes the light. So even if the coil is weak, it'll still flash the light. And whereas these other two, you have to have a strong coil in order for the spark to actually jump the gap. So you can have a weak coil and it won't fire the plug properly. So anyway, those are just a couple of the different spark testing tools that are available. And this concludes the ignition module test.